Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Unstoppable Mindset, where inclusion, diversity, and the unexpected meet. We're probably going to deal with a little bit of all of that today. Our guest this time is Mel Stephens from down in Australia. And what time is it down there, Mel?
It's 9:30 a.m. on Tuesday.
So right now it's 3:32 p.m. Monday. So what should I expect to be happening in the next 16, 18 hours? Anything exciting?
Not really, no, just the usual evening, feed the cat and dog, evening chores, have a nice hot shower, wash the dishes, go to bed,
Oh, that
and
sounds
wake up
good.
at 7:30.
Well, I wake up before then, but that's okay. Well, anyway, it's really a pleasure to have you here. Mel is a third generation blind person. Her parents were blind, and so I gather in the generation before them, there was also somebody who was blind.
Yeah, my maternal grandmother.
Your grandmother was blind. Now, do we know what caused all this blindness?
Yeah, there's a condition called Rod Cone Dystrophy, which is in the retinal dystrophy family. And it was first discovered in my grandmother, or my nana, who is my mum's mum. And she started losing her vision when she was around 13. She left school because she was starting to have trouble seeing. And she had finished losing her eyesight by the time she was about 40. Then my mother had the condition as well, and so did her youngest sister, and so do I.
There you go. Well, okay. And what do you think about blindness?
I think that it is an absolute blessing. I feel like I've been very fortunate to have collected the family gene on my way. And I know that had I been a sighted person, had I got my father's condition and been able to have a cornea transplant at a young age and been able to see, to drive, to do all those sighted child things, I don't think I would have had as many blessings as I have.
Well, there you go. So many people think blindness is a tragedy, and we've talked about it before on this podcast, and I'm sure we'll delve into it in various ways today, but blindness isn't the tragedy. The tragedy is what people think about blindness. And I understand that people with eyesight can do so many things, but one of the things that I've started talking about lately regarding blindness is this. I oftentimes, when I speak, ask people to tell me what they think blind people can't, that is, cannot do. And typically speaking, in our massive survey, number one is drive a car. Okay, I appreciate that that's the view that people have. And then when I ask them, well, why can't a blind person drive a car? They say, well, of course, they can't see. And I say, well, but what does that mean? What is it about not seeing that makes it such that a blind person can't drive a car? And usually people don't answer that very well. Well, the reality is, the real reason blind people in general can't drive a car is they don't get the information necessary to allow them to drive a car like a sighted person who can look out their windshield and out their windows and get that information. But in fact, in 2001, the president of the National Federation of the Blind, Mark Maurer, actually challenged colleges and universities to develop a car that a blind person can drive. And I don't mean an autonomous vehicle, but I mean a vehicle that a blind person would actually get into and drive because they had access to the information necessary to allow them to drive a car like a sighted person could. And at the Daytona Speedway, right before the Rolex 24 race in 2011, a gentleman who's now president of the National Federation of the Blind, Mark Riccobono, got into a Ford Escape and drove it around the Daytona Speedway, avoiding barrels, going through obstacle courses, working with a van who was in front of him that was throwing out boxes that he had to avoid, and even passing that van and going to the winner's circle at the end of the course. The fact of the matter is that technology is growing to the point where blind people can drive a car. Driving is all about information access. And so it's really fun to talk to people about that. And they made a video about it. I think it's somewhere on the National Federation of the Blind website. Blinddriverchallenge.org is where it was, but I think it's moved. But it's the Daytona Blind Driver Challenge. It's really kind of cool. But the fact is, it's all about information. And anything you deal with regarding blindness and comparing it to eyesight is all about information. And there's no reason that we can't do the same things other people can do, because as technology grows, and it will continue to grow, we get access to more of that information. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, you know, can't, to me, is not a word that exists. And I had that sort of taught to me when I was in my teens, is that cannot is something that isn't a word that should be in your vocabulary. And it just hasn't been ever since. Can't, cannot. I've got to be careful because some of our American listeners may think that with my Aussie accent I'm saying something else.
That's okay. We gotcha.
And normal and things like that are words that I try not to use in my vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
And cannot is especially one of them, because I'm sorry, but I can. I can drive a car. It's just not very legal at the moment.
Well, you know, but that will change over time. When we get into these kinds of discussions, I'm always reminded about the second Star Wars movie where Luke Skywalker meets Yoda, and Yoda wants him to get his starfighter that sunk in the water out of the water, and Luke says, "I'll try," and Yoda says, "There is no try, do or do not." And
Exactly.
I think that's absolutely right.
Exactly.
Good for Frank Oz and Luke Skywalker and George Lucas.
Yeah.
Well, so you've basically been blind for quite a while, and that's understandable. Tell me, so you went off and you went to school like other kids did. Did you go to college?
So we don't do college in Australia. In Australia, we do primary school, which is sort of elementary school, I believe, which is for grade prep, which is sort of 5-year-olds, right through to grade 6, which is sort of 11, 12.
12, right.
And then you go to high school or secondary school, whatever you want to call it. Depends on kind of your state, I guess, whether they call it high school or secondary school. And that is from grade 6, so like 12, 13, right through to 18.
Okay.
And that's where you finish. That's like grade 12, and you finish high school. Then you take your final exams, and you can go through to either university, which I guess is like college,
Yeah,
or you can go through to TAFE, which is a tertiary education for more practical things. So that's where people learn things like auto mechanics and
like a trade.
yeah, like a trade school.
And what did you call it again?
TAFE. We call it TAFE.
Okay.
TAFE.
TAFE. Okay.
And you can then, if you do a TAFE degree, it's like a certificate, and it takes, maybe 1 or 2 years. And then you can do an apprenticeship in your chosen discipline, electronics or plumbing or whatever, and then you have your career. Or if you finish a university degree, then you go on to become a nurse or a teacher or what have you. So, yeah, we don't have college. We don't,
Okay.
a lot of kids don't really travel to, like, you hear of people from Wisconsin going to university in New York. That doesn't really happen. Like, a lot of people sort of stay in the same state that they went to school in, and I don't know, it's not as big a deal as it is in the US, but it's also slightly not as crazy big a deal as it is in the US. Like, Aussies are a lot more laid back, and it's not that we don't celebrate things like going to uni and graduating school and graduating kinder and graduating second primary school and stuff, but I don't know, it just doesn't seem to sort of blow up as much as it does for the States.
So what did you do?
So I went to what we call a mainstream primary and secondary school, both here in my hometown of Kyneton. I was the only really physically disabled child in my primary and secondary schools permanently. There were a couple that sort of were in and out, but the main one I can remember, her family pulled her out because it was too hard for her. There were a few people with, intellectual disabilities and stuff like that, but they didn't stay long either. Then I did go to uni. That's the other thing. Aussies shorten every single word, so we don't call it uni. It's a university. It's uni.
Yeah, I understand.
So why use so many words when you can shorten them?
Yeah.
So I went to uni, and I lived in the residence at uni in a town that's only 60 odd kilometers away. So, like, an hour's drive maybe away from where I live. That lasted all of 6 weeks. I hated it. I didn't like being around the other kids. I didn't like living with other kids. I'm not a people person. I hate people. So I was just like, yeah, no, I can't cope with this. The content of my course was great. I was doing a Bachelor of Arts, but I hated the kids. So I was like, yep, no, thank you very much, goodbye. So I left that, and I ended up doing a TAFE degree in a certificate in education support. So I became a teacher's aide. I worked in that job for a little while down in Melbourne and moved away from home properly for the first time, and lived away from home in that role and in that house in Melbourne, so a big 3 million, 4 million population city, for about 20 months. Hated that. Too many people. Loved the job though. And then I moved to a small town on the other side of the state, 500 k's away, and started my own business as a technology and Braille trainer at the ripe old age of like 24, and decided that that was what I was going to do. And that was going really, really well until a certain world event happened and we all got locked in our houses and I couldn't work anymore.
How long did the business go until that happened?
2 years.
Okay.
And I was working at our local Vision Australia office in Mildura as well, on their reception. So I was kind of doing two jobs. And then the sickness came along and no more work, because you can't go into schools when there's no schools to educate. And you can't go into nursing homes when they're all locked down, and you can't help their residents with MacDegen with our iPads and stuff. So bye-bye work, bye-bye money. And I had to make a decision towards the end of 2020 keep paying for the house or keep paying for the horse. And the horse won. And so I rang up Mum and I said, "Hey, Mum, would you like 2 dogs, 2 cats, a daughter, and a fish?" So I moved back with my parents for 2.5 years at the beginning of 21. And then I scraped myself back off the floor and got a rental of my own, working again now, and I've been living back on my own for just over 2 years.
So where was the horse in
being-
all this?
So the horse came with me back to Kyneton and is now very happy and very well looked after. And was she worth leaving Mildura and coming home? Yes, absolutely.
I am presuming that you did not ride the horse all the way from there to where you are.
No, funny
Okay.
story actually. I organised transport for her from Mildura to Kyneton, which I said is about 500 Ks.
Right.
Ask Google people how many miles that is because I don't know. We work in kilometres here. And I said, yep, this is the address. They were going to pick her up on the Wednesday and deliver her on the Thursday. So I had already left Mildura by then. It was actually the week after because I was going to check out a couple of properties and make my decision on where she was going after I got here. So she was picked up like a week or two after I left. So my friend and the lady who owned the property where she was made sure she got on the truck and everything was fine. They left Mildura. Next day they ring me up. Oh, so we're on the road. We've got her in the float in the back, and the GPS keeps saying it's 800 kilometers away. It's going to take us, 8 or 9 hours to. What? Anyway, did some digging. I found out that I'd left out the postcode, and there's a town in South Australia, which is the next state over, that's spelt Keyneton, and Kyneton is spelt Kyneton. And they were in Hingson in South Australia trying to find the address, not Kyneton, Victoria, trying to find the address. So I learnt the value of the postcode or the zip code, I think you guys call it.
Same thing.
So yeah, put in the postcode when you're having something delivered, especially a horse, people. So she had a luxurious weekend with the gentleman who actually owns the transport company who I use.
And what was the horse's name? What's the horse's name?
That's Maggie.
That's Maggie. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I know you have 2 horses now. Now, how did you get Maggie in the first place?
So Maggie was listed on Facebook, free to a good home. Now, if you're a really smart horse person and you know what you're doing and you make decisions with your head, not your heart, you swipe away from horse free to good home on Facebook Marketplace. I did not. So I went and looked at horse free to good home, and she was skin and bone. Her coat was very dull. The guy who had her was, shall we say, not an equestrian.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like it.
And references to bullets were made. And I was going, I can't have that. So, and I said, you can't do this. And I helped to look after her for a little while. And it was all going well. And then it just sort of turned out to be, well, I'm not going to look after her anymore. So if you don't take her, I'm going to.
Destroy her, yeah.
Yeah. So I sort of acquired this animal and fed her up, did work with her. I was looking at, and you'll see on a lot of my YouTube channel, there's a lot of like training and retraining videos with her. I was trying to retrain her to saddle, so to be ridden. But then I found out that she's got some physical problems from when she was racing that mean that she probably shouldn't be ridden. So she just hangs out in the paddock and eats my money now. And is just a pet. It's like having a giant dog.
Well, and as you say in your bio, you're mad about dogs, cats, and horses. So you have a second horse, right, Abby?
Yeah, so I've got my little Ab. She's so for those of you who are interested in colors, Maggie is sort of a reddish browny color. She's called a bay, so she's a reddish dark brown, and her legs and mane and tail are black, and she's got a couple of white spots on her. She's got one of her back legs, it's got a bit of white towards her foot or hoof, and she's got a little bit of white on her forehead. But Ab is meant to be white. I say meant to be because she's been in the paddock with no rug and she's been rolling in the mud and the grass and the who knows whatever else. So she's kind of currently bits of white and brown and orangey red, and she really needs a bath. But it's too cold to bath her still.
Yeah.
So, Abby is meant to be white, and she is, I bought her, found her sale ad about, what's it been now? Not quite 18 months ago, about 16 months ago, I bought her because I was like, well, Maggie's not rideable. I need something that is quiet, easy to ride, easy to handle, all of that kind of stuff. And I came across Abby. She was like a needle in a haystack, absolutely perfect. And I picked her up, and I've only been on her once because I've been too sick. So, yeah.
Well, so you today, among other things, well, actually, before we do that, let's talk a little bit more about philosophy. So one of the things.
Hang on a sec. Pen, leave it.
And of course, Pen is Mel's guide dog, Penelope.
Yeah, she's chewing a bone in the other room, and it's really distracting.
Well, so one of the things, and you say it a few times in your bio and other places, and it's something that we're starting to deal with over here. Typically, blind people are referred to as blind or visually impaired, and we're learning that visually impaired is not a good thing to say, because the fact of the matter is that why should we be compared to somebody because of how much eyesight we have or don't have? And that's also an outgrowth of deaf people who for years have recognized calling them hearing impaired is really an insult. It's deaf or hard of hearing. And the reason is because why are we viewed, or are they viewed, as being impaired? And impaired is such a horrible term. So for blind people, blind and low vision is a whole lot better. Less insulting. Well, it's not too insulting, but it's also not making the same equations, and it's not really dealing at all with impaired, because if we're going to talk about us being visually impaired, then we also ought to be able to talk about all those light-dependent people, those billions of light-dependent people in the world, as blind impaired. And of course, they will never want to do that. So we really got to get away from impaired. But you asked the question, what's the difference? What is a different ability as opposed to a disability? I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I first of all I'm going to say in Australia, and this is going back to my father's philosophy now, a lot of people would say my late father because he passed away recently.
Mm-hmm.
But he would not want to be known as late because
Late,
he was
yes.
always on time. So my father would always say, I'm not visually impaired because it means I don't look good. That's what the Americans say. In Australia, I'm vision impaired. So there you go. There's one for you.
Except it's
Um,
still impaired, which is the issue.
exactly.
Yeah.
But that was just his thing,
Yeah. No, I
was
understand.
he he uh he always said that visually impaired made him sound like he didn't look good. Um, Penelope, would you please leave it? She's brought the bone in here now, so I'm going to get even more distracted. Ugh. Sorry. So the thing about the different ability versus the disability is, for me personally, and this is why I use the different ability phrase, is dis is a negative connotation, and I don't see, for want of a better word,
Fine
a
word.
negative connotation to my vision loss. Therefore, I don't have a disability. I have different abilities. My different abilities are to read Braille, to use voiceover at 100% speed, to hear walls and doorways and lamp posts and things like that. You
Mm-hmm.
know, that is why I say different ability rather than disability, because disability is negative,
Yeah.
and I don't want to talk about my vision loss in a negative way, because I feel very privileged and
Which which
blessed
is
to have it.
which is why we use blind and low vision,
Mm.
because we don't talk about loss, we don't talk about impairment in any way, and I don't even use the term different ability because I don't think my ability is different. I use my hearing, and everybody has hearing. Some people hear better than others. Some people listen better than others, which is a different story. That's what my wife always said. But the fact is, I don't think my abilities are different. It's just that I use oftentimes different tools than other people use. But that doesn't really make me different, because we all have gifts and we all have challenges. And I believe, and I've said this before on the podcast, that every person on this planet, if you're going to use the term, has a disability. Most people, their disability is they're light dependent. If the power goes out and they can't immediately grab a flashlight or a smartphone or a candle, they're in a world of hurt because they can't function because they don't know how to do it. They could learn, but they don't know how to do it. And I've even
Mm.
seen situations in the middle of an afternoon where in a building with plenty of light coming in through the windows, but the power goes out, people freak out because they don't have all the light they expect to have. They're light dependent. They have as much a disability as I do, which is another way of saying exactly what you said. Disability is such a horrible thing. And if you're going to talk about disability being a negative thing, then how do you explain the dis in discrete, disciple, and discern, for example? Those aren't negative. You know, we've got to get out of this habit of viewing so many things as negative and recognize that in reality, we all have challenges, we all have gifts, and we should appreciate the gifts that people have, even if they're different than the ones that we have. But we shouldn't view them as less than us just because their gifts are different and they use different techniques and tools to do the things they do. So that's kind of the thing that I would point out. And I think it's so very important to do, because we've got to get people out of the habit of viewing us as less or different than anybody else just because we don't have eyesight.
Mm. I Yeah, I like that. But then, what word do we use? Do we just say blind ability? I don't know. It's
Blind.
just,
It's not ability, just blind, low vision. Um, why do we deal with ability? We've got sighted people who are colorblind. Are they colorblind disabled? We've got so many different kinds of things. The issue is we all have abilities, and there are also so many things that we individually can't do. Short people don't have the ability to reach as far up to get things as taller people. Does that make them less than tall people? Or tall people, very tall people, can't sit at a lot of tables because the tables are too low or the counters are too low. I have friends, actually, Roselle's puppy raisers were very tall, and they built a home, and they built the home with higher counters than normal because the regular height counters weren't comfortable for them. Does that make them disabled or anybody else disabled? We've got to get away from this whole ability comparison concept. Everybody has abilities and everybody has things that they don't do as well as other people.
yeah, I like that. Actually, that's, mm,
And it is something that, that we really need to deal with. And philosophically, people are going to have to at some point come to understand that, and that in reality, while we all have gifts and we all have challenges, they're not all the same, and that's okay. It doesn't make anyone less than anybody else.
mm,
So
yeah, I
there's
like
something to
that.
think about.
Yeah,
Well,
that's woken my brain up. Thank you.
well, there you are. At least you had a good night's sleep earlier, so that's okay.
Yeah,
So tell me about you and YouTube. You are a YouTuber.
I am. I'm getting very close to 1,000 subscribers finally after 7 years on the platform. I when I first started, there were two big YouTubers who were blind, and they were both from North America. And
And who are they?
it was Tommy Edison and Molly Burke.
I thought you were going to say Tom. I'm actually going to meet Tommy Edison next week at an event. I've never met him. I've watched his YouTube channel. Anyway, go ahead.
Hilarious,
Yeah, he is.
hilarious guy. Uh, and I wanted to represent the Australian side of vision loss because I said to myself, where are the Aussies? Where is the Australianness here? So I started doing some content talking, and I will admit that my first videos were dodgy, and I haven't deleted them, but I probably should, because they were pretty bad. They were awful. They were crap. Um, but I just started talking about my journey as someone who has Rod Cone Dystrophy. I worked on just being authentic, being myself, talking about living independently, having little to no assistance, talking about traveling blind, about being a guide dog handler, being an animal owner, going on trips, doing all of the things that I do and did, and just also not doing highly edited, I don't want to say nonsense, but highly edited stuff with music and pictures, and sitting there as a blind person going, "What's happening? Can somebody tell me what's going on?" because in some YouTube videos, that's what I sit there and do. I go, can somebody please tell me what's going on? So I record everything. I talk a lot in my videos, and I talk about the accessibility of things. I'm, always just rabbiting on. I'm sure people get bored. But I just try and make it as real and authentic as I possibly can. And apparently there's people out there who like it because there's 903 subscribers at the moment. So, yeah.
How do people find you on YouTube?
Just Mel Stephens.
MEL and then STEPHENS.
Phens.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
there you go, folks. There's our first way to reach Mel today. Well, so how long have you been doing it?
So I've been uploading consistently since about February of 2018.
Oh.
Yeah, I've been doing it for nearly 8 years now. I do cruises. I go on a lot of cruises and I talk about some of the accessibility. One of my cruising buddies is my friend Judy. She has a channel herself, which is called Living on Six Wheels. And she has multi disabilities, including low vision. And so it's a bit of fun watching the blind girl and the girl in the electric wheelchair go on a cruise. I have been doing content about going on train rides and just doing all sorts of weird and wonderful things. But I always try and have a accessibility. How does this work for me as a blind person? How does this work for me as a guide dog handler? Sort of link back all the time.
Has Penelope cruised?
Yeah, she's
Good.
been on 2 cruises. There is a video of her going on her first cruise in January of 2023. And she had, there's a bit in that video which is so cute of her wearing her safety vest, her life jacket. So that's cute. She hated wearing her life jacket for the video, but I was like, sorry, dog, you've got to show this. So yeah, she's been on 2 cruises and she may be going on a 3rd next year, but it will depend on a few things age related because she will be 8.5 by then.
What's the longest cruise you've taken?
The longest cruise I've taken, 2 weeks out to New Zealand and back.
Ah.
Yeah. So I went just before the illness. At the end of January, I went on a cruise out to New Zealand. We left from Melbourne and we did 14 nights, and we went around to the south of the South Island and saw the Fiordlands, and then we went up the east coast and stopped at Dunedin and Christchurch and Wellington and a few other, Napier and Auckland, and came back to Melbourne.
You have to stop at Dunedin, of course.
Yeah.
I went to New Zealand to speak for the Royal New Zealand Foundation of the Blind in 2003, and the only time we had for play was about 12 hours on Dunedin between speeches, but it was fun.
And if you go to Wellington, wear a hat that's got a strappy thing that keeps your hat on, because one of the cruises that I went on, which was only 13 nights, the captain called it Windington because it was the windiest place I think I've ever been.
Yeah. We have our fair amount of wind up here in the high desert. By the way, you mentioned 500 kilometers between places for Maggie. That's about 310 miles. I didn't interrupt. There you go. But anyway.
There you go. Well done.
I'm used to doing meters as well as the miles and so on, so it's no problem.
Yeah, I'm good with meters to feet, but miles to kilometers, I haven't figured that one out yet.
Yeah, well, that's okay. But anyway, um, so have your photos gotten better on YouTube over time?
Yeah, I
Oh,
think
good.
they have definitely increased. For example, don't wear my pajamas in videos as much anymore. Like I used to just go, there's an idea for a video, sit down in front of my Mac wearing whatever I was wearing, pajamas included, sleeping bag, tracksuits, whatever, and just record a video. That was some of my old really dodgy content. I have recorded, um, I do record things and actually think about what I'm going to say now instead of and as
Hmm.
much. And I've learned how to chop bits off the video as well if the end isn't very good or if the start isn't very good. And I've also learned how to do voiceover. So
Yeah.
in a few videos, I might, like a travel video, for example, I might talk over the film instead of be talking while I'm walking and using the dog so that I don't get distracted with what I'm doing.
What tools do you use to edit the videos and do that?
It's all on my iPhone. If the
Oh, okay.
iPhone can't do it, it doesn't get done.
Got it.
So
Okay.
thank you, Apple.
Yeah.
My
Well,
dad used to say that I had an orchard because I've got an iPhone, an iPad, an Apple Watch, a MacBook. So
there you
orchard,
are. I've got the iPhone and the Apple Watch, so part way there.
part way. Yeah, half an orchard.
Half an orchard. So, how has growing up being blind and dealing with blindness been different for you than you think with your parents? A lot of changes, I would imagine, over the years.
So different. For a start, mum and dad had a dedicated school for blind kids that they both went to. And they not only got their education from kindergarten, so sort of 3, 4 year old, to probably about ninth grade, so sort of 14, 15 years old. But they also got to learn their orientation mobility, their tasks of daily living, and all of those things wrapped into one. But they didn't live with their families for all of that time. My mum's family lived a long way from the school, and mum only went to, and my aunt only went home during the school holidays. My dad was lucky that he could go home at the weekends because his home was only about 20 minutes away from school. So he could come to school on Monday mornings and go home on Friday afternoons.
Now, he
They,
was blind also.
yeah, so he had, I nearly said he's got then, he had corneal
Hmm.
dystrophy.
Okay.
So his corneas didn't work. So he, at his time of death, he had uh, probably about 2% vision in his good eye and no vision in his bad eye.
Got it.
But it did fluctuate, especially the vision in his good eye, did fluctuate from between 10 and 2%, depending on his cornea graft at the time. And he had between 10 and 12, can't remember exactly how many cornea grafts in his 73 years. So he went through the mill. He got sick of
Mm-hmm.
having eye
Mm-hmm.
operations. And it was
But
interesting because his cornea grafts went from the first one, he had to lay on his back in hospital in bed for a week. And, for his first one. And by the time he had his last one in 2010, he went in day surgery and that was it. So that was an interesting contrast. So they didn't have any technology. They just had a Perkins Braille writer. They had records that they had to listen to for their audio books. Mum had to try and source all of her stuff in the library at uni to try and get it recorded and stuff. It was really hard. You know, a lot of things. It was just very difficult and clunky to try and get access to print material
compared to today.
A child who was blind compared to today.
Right.
When I was at school, I went to a mainstream school. I had what we call a VT, or a visiting teacher, who came to my school once a week, and their job was to help the school with the tools and skills that they would need to help me learn. So one of my teacher's aides learnt Braille through both primary school and secondary school. The VT was also the person who coordinated having my books made into Braille or e-text by the statewide Vision Resource Centre, who translated all the books for us. And I went down to the school for the blind that Mum and Dad went to, which had been converted into a day school for people with multi-disabilities by this point. And I did a program twice a term looking at my blind skills, for want of a better phrase. So learning, you know, JAWS and Braille maths and social skills and activities of daily living and stuff like that. And doing things with blind kids because we didn't, you know, have access to other blind kids, except for when we did stuff with guide dogs or with the School for the Blind.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very different. And I got a laptop when I was in year 7 that had Magic, which is a Zoom, you know, large print screen reader thing.
Video magnification, right.
Yep. So I could see my computer screen a little bit, but I was also learning to integrate with JAWS because I would lose my vision eventually. And I had a Braille note, and so I was doing, by year 9, I stopped doing all of my stuff with pen altogether. And so year 10 was my first year that I did everything on either my laptop or my Braille note.
Yeah.
So very different.
Well, certainly there continue to be a lot of changes, and technology has helped a great deal. We talked about driving a car earlier. In so many different ways, we're seeing that technology is enhancing our lives. And the way I tend to view it is technology has been enhancing people's lives for a long time. It's just that what we have generally not done is made sure that those of us who don't see have the same access to that technology by it being made available in a way that we can use it, which is part of the issue. We're seeing more and more of that happening. As you pointed out, being that you live in an apple orchard, as it were, there's so much that is being put onto devices like the iPhone now, including continuous glucose monitors for people who have diabetes, who may be blind. We're now starting to see that there are ways, and organizations are approving the ways to use the apps to actually intercept and read the information on a continuous glucose monitor so that a person can tell their sugar levels and deal with whatever needs to be done because of the app as opposed to looking at a screen. And I think that's a great example of how we're starting to see technology being made more relevant to all of us, which I think is extremely important to do.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think we're becoming too reliant on it. And this is my problem, especially with orientation and mobility. Like, as much as I need to use a computer for work and I need to use my phone to do my social media work and all that kind of stuff, I will not use AT for orientation and mobility. If I have to, I will use IRA and get assistance from them. But I'm a very old-fashioned O&M person, and GPS, I get it, only if I have to. IRA, yep, okay, if I'm very, very lost, certainly. But I prefer to use my brain
Mm-hmm.
as much as I can. And even doing some things here in the office at home, like I've still got a stylus and hand frame. And if I just want to write some notes really quickly while I'm working, then I'll just do that because I feel like if we rely on technology too much, and I'm really into, I've been going down the rabbit hole recently of what do they call it? AI slop and, AI taking over our brains and that. I really don't want that to happen to me. So I've become, I've been trying really hard to push back as hard as I can against technology. And one of the ways that I do that is by not using it when I'm doing O&M.
Well, okay, yeah, and I have no problem with that. I think that the purpose of, say, a GPS technology is to give you information that you might not have otherwise been able to access. So
Mm.
I will use a GPS, for example, if I want to find out how to get from where I am to somewhere. I will get that information. I don't tend to use Google Maps in walking directions, although I can. I've done it a couple of times, but I will only do it when I'm not sure of the information that I have, so that I get the information that I need. But I believe in exactly what you're saying. It's all about using your brain. One of the techniques that's used over here by some of the better centers dealing with blindness is called structural discovery. So you're walking along a sidewalk and all of a sudden you find yourself somewhere where you don't expect to be, on a lawn or whatever. And structural discovery says, okay, stop. Now start going backwards in your mind and figure out where you made a wrong turn or got lost. And that works extremely well. But it works well because you really take the time to use your brain to figure that out. And it's so important to do that. So I hear exactly what you're saying. I will use IRA when I need information. And now some of the new AI glasses, like the new Echo Vision glasses, I will use those to get information that I don't otherwise have quick access to. I refuse to believe that IRA destroys my independence. The purpose of IRA is to give me information that I don't otherwise have access to, visual information that I might not otherwise know. And I will use it for that, but I won't use it for everything because I want to work really hard to make sure that when I hear cooking instructions, I will remember those cooking instructions the next time I want to prepare the same food. I don't want to keep going back and looking. I know a lot of sighted people will read the recipe every time, but if I can remember it, I'd rather do that.
Exactly. And, I think IRA does enhance our independence. And for me, it has, because for me, IRA has meant that I can take pictures for Instagram that look better than pictures that I would take of
Mm-hmm.
myself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, IRA for me means that I can wander around somewhere that I haven't been before and find what I'm looking for, and discover things on the way, you know.
And for those people who don't know what IRA is, it's AIRA, Artificial Intelligent Remote Assistant. And IRA is a technology that uses cameras on smartphones and other things, and a trained paid agent who can describe whatever the camera sees. IRA can do other things also, like help in dealing with, say, inaccessible forms or other things on your computer. An IRA agent can go into your computer remotely and do that. But IRA is all about providing information that you might not otherwise have access to, which is what's really relevant and important about it. It's been around now for, 15 years, and it's a good, or 10 years, and it's a good product.
Yeah, they helped me weed my garden the other night. Someone said to me 4 or 5 days ago, "Oh, you've got some massive milk thistles, which are these big, ugly weeds in
Yeah.
your garden." And I said, "Oh, where?" And they said, "Oh, well, I can see them when I'm standing looking out the kitchen window." So that gave me a good guide for approximately where to look for them. So because where I'm at with my medical conditions at the moment, I'm not really up to feeling around on the ground for ages for these weeds. I went out the back with Ira and I said, "Someone said that they can see these milk thistles somewhere around here." And the agent looked up what they look like to make sure that he had the right thing. And he said, "Oh, yes, I can see like where they are." And he helped me get every last one of these jolly milk thistles. So now my poor roses can actually grow without being taken over by these milk thistles.
You need a goat to go along with Maggie and Abby.
I need, no, not a goat, not a goat, a sheep, maybe.
Maybe. So, you love living in the country. You much prefer the country to the city. Have you noticed differences in discrimination between what you experience in the city and what you experience in the country?
I feel like in some country towns, I'll take Mildura as an example, which is where I lived for 3 years before the pandemic came and made my life difficult, are very backwards. Their attitude, I guess, to disability or blindness or any kind of difference is very backwards. You know, they don't expect you to be able to do anything on your own. I was working at Vision Australia, which is a blindness organisation, and I once got patronised by a colleague when checking the cash income for the day and counting it, because she didn't think I could identify the cash. And she goes, "Oh, you're so clever. What's this coin?" And I told her, and "What's this coin?" And I told her, and she goes, "Oh, you're so clever. And how can you do that, darling?" And so, like a very backwards kind of attitude to disability. That's sort of some of the more
So next time that happens,
towns.
try to have her around at night, close all the shades, turn off the lights, and now tell me, madam, what coin is this? And see what happens.
Oh, felt
I
like
know.
decking her.
Yeah.
And whereas in the city, you can get everything from that to welcoming, perfect, reading the menu, no problem at all. But it's interesting because here in Kyneton, we've lived here with our guide dogs, with our white canes for 30 years. Mum and dad came up here when I was 6 months old, so 31 years actually. And here, there's absolutely no discrimination. Here, we're just an accepted part of the community. And a lot of other people who are, there's a guy who can't speak and he is accepted into the community. There's a few people who are in
Mm-hmm.
wheelchairs and stuff. And I feel like here in Kyneton, there's, you know, an approach to people like ourselves who we're just a part of the community and we're just treated like everybody else, which I think is really, really good. But yeah, definitely some country towns and the city, there's some differences in just in the backwardsness in some places. And I don't mean to say that to sound awful, but I
Well, it's
certainly did notice it in Mildura because it was like, well, every time I go somewhere, I have to have a carer, or else they're going to
mm-hmm.
think that I'm, how can she do that on her own? And
It's exposure, it's education,
mm,
and there is somewhat more of that in bigger cities, but it still is pretty pervasive overall. Well,
mm.
what would you say to someone who is losing their eyesight? What advice would you give them?
Don't, and this is going to be hard for someone to swallow, but don't mourn forever. Don't be like, oh, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. How am I ever going to go on? Because it's okay. I promise you will go on. Uh, it might take a while to get used to not seeing the way you used to, but just don't take it as, well, now I can't do anything. Sorry,
Mm-hmm.
cannot do anything. There's no cannots. You have to just take a deep breath. It's going to be okay. Learn as many of your blind skills as you can as early as possible.
Yeah.
Go to somewhere where you can learn to use a cane, to read Braille, to do all of those things. And yes, I did say read Braille. I don't
Mm-hmm.
want people to learn just how to use JAWS or VoiceOver or whatever. I
Mm-hmm.
want you to learn to read. I'm sorry, but you have to be able to learn to read. Remember
Yep.
reading? Yeah.
Yes.
Remember reading? You need to learn to read as well as hear because there's a big difference.
Yep.
So learn to read, learn to use a cane, learn to do all your blind skills before the lights are out completely. Yes, Pen. Expose yourself to people who are in a positive mindset in the vision loss community and in a in a positive, see it in a positive light. Don't get too caught up in the negatives. And if you're a parent of somebody who has vision loss, don't mourn for what that child isn't going to be able to do, because the only thing that your child isn't going to be able to do is stuff that he legally can't do, like drive a car, but he can do it, he just can't do it legally.
Today.
And today. And by the time he's 50 or 60, if he's born today, he probably will be legally allowed to drive a car. Who knows?
Yep.
So don't mourn for what you haven't got or won't have or what your child won't have. Just bring them up as a normal child, make them do chores around the house. I was vacuuming and cleaning my bedroom and my bathroom and earning money and traveling to play blind table tennis in Melbourne by the time I was 15.
Mm-hmm.
Make them do these things, make them be exactly the same as other kids. Don't wrap them up in cotton wool because that's not going to help them, and uh, don't mourn for what they aren't going to have because they are going to have it. So
Well,
yeah.
there you go. Well, I want to thank you for being here with us and for all the words of wisdom and all the great experiences that you've talked about today. They're very valuable, and I hope people will appreciate them and take them to heart all the way across the line, because it's so important that people learn that just because we're different, everybody's different.
Right.
And the reality is that we all can learn to do things, whether we do them exactly the same way or not isn't relevant.
Exactly. Just
So,
just remember 10 eyes, she says, waving her fingers at the camera, can sometimes be better than 2.
well, just remember that a picture may well be worth 1,000 words, but it takes up a whole lot more memory. So, there are pluses and minuses to pictures.
That's right.
Well, thanks for being here. And I want to thank you all for listening and watching us today. Wherever you are, please give us a 5-star review. We appreciate it. Love to get more reviews from you. So please do that. Take the time to give us a review. People who are interested in exploring the podcast will be more apt to do it if you give us a review. And I think Mel's given us a lot of wisdom that is worth giving a good review for. If you know anyone who ought to be a guest, Mel including you, let us know. You can find me at michaelhingson.com/podcast. And Michael Hingson is MichaelHingson.com/podcast. Or you can email me at michaelhi@accessibe.com. Love to hear from you. And with that, I want to thank you once more for being here. And Mel, I want to thank you again for being here as well.
No worries, Mike. Have a great day.